Times and Seasons, a program dealing with significant issues of public concern.
I think if I hadn't gotten sexually active so soon, I would have had a little bit more respect for myself. I really don't have that much respect for myself.
Sexual promiscuity in America is epidemic. We're surrounded by the evidence.
I'm Gordon Jump. During this program, we'll examine sexual immorality in the United States. We'll discuss some of the consequences of sexual promiscuity, and we'll consider several ways to overcome this behavior.
But these kids might be 10, 12, 13, 14 years old, having babies.
I think it's really shocked my father. A lot of people, my grandma disowned me. Well, at first I felt like dirt. And then it just kind of faded away. That's why I have to live with this now. I did it.
In Washington, D.C., Dodie Livingston, U.S. Commissioner on Children, Youth, and Families, is one of the many people very concerned about this national tragedy.
There's a high incidence of child abuse with teen parents raising these children. There's also a high incidence of neglect, of the child not having the proper food, nutrition, as well as upbringing, not ever having any discipline or kind of the right influence in their lives as youngsters. And we all know that those first early years are so important to their behavior, their ability to bond with their parents, and then to make friends later, their socialization skills. All that starts when kids are very little. And if those opportunities to help the child then are blown, we're talking about serious problems later.
This year, over 1 million adolescents will become pregnant. Most will not be married. Half of these young girls will give birth to live babies. 40% will terminate their pregnancies by abortion. The rest will end in miscarriage or stillbirth. 10,000 babies will be born to girls under age 15. For 45 years, Dr. Homer Ellsworth has practiced obstetrics and gynecology in Salt Lake City. He's seen this tragedy unfold many times.
The youngest girl I've ever delivered was 10. And the youngest girl I know that I ever delivered who kept her baby was 13. And I can tell you that child had a tough time growing up. I lost track of it after 5 or 6 years, but a 13-year-old mother is not a good mother for the security and maturation of a young child.
For the young men and girls who engage in early sexual behavior, the cost to them and society can be enormous. Many will never complete high school. Future plans and personal goals may change drastically. Divorce rates soar. Families are broken, and health may be destroyed.
Here at the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, scientists are working with at least 23 different diseases that are or could be transmitted through intimate sexual contact. Even now, as you watch this program, 10 million people living in America may be infected with sexually transmitted diseases. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, is a relatively new and frightening disease. But the director for the Centers of Disease Control, Dr. James Mason, is also concerned about a long list of what he says are still very dangerous sexually transmitted diseases.
Common diseases that have been around for a long time, such as syphilis and gonorrhea, chlamydial infections, these are real problems in the United States at this time. Gonorrhea, a new strain that's resistant to penicillin, is on a rampage. The increase in these difficult-to-treat strains are increasing at a very, very alarming rate at the present time. Chlamydial infections that not only cause acute disease, but pelvic inflammatory disease and pelvic abscesses and sterility are at levels of prevalence and incidence in the nation that are alarming.
And, according to Mason, These diseases affect all sexually active segments of our society, including the very young.
The epidemic of gonorrhea, particularly in chlamydial infection in teenagers, even going down to not just teens but 12 and lower, is an absolute disgrace. Unfortunately, our teenagers, instead of saying no to sex, are increasingly involved in premarital sex, and the number of partners that individuals have is growing, and this is directly related to the increase in all of these sexually transmitted diseases.
Sexual promiscuity can also result in cancer. Dr. Homer Ellsworth tells of one young woman who came to his office with cancer of the cervix.
She'd had 2 children, both of them out of wedlock. And after we took out her uterus and removed her cancer, she came back in the office for a checkup, and she said to me, why do you think I really had cancer? All my friends want to know why I'm at 23, I have cancer. That's supposed to be a disease of older people. And I said, in essence, you really don't want to know? She said, yes, I do. And I said, well, how old were you when you started having intercourse? And she said, 13. And I said, how many sexual partners have you had? And she said, oh, many, many. She said, I couldn't count. And I said, there's your answer. And she said, fine, and didn't seem upset. But there are at least 4 sexually transmitted viruses, and probably a lot more, that predispose to cancer. I mean, there's herpes, and there's chlamydia, and there's condyloma acuminata, and you can go right down the list of diseases that we know actually predispose to malignancy. And the earlier a young girl starts having intercourse and the increased number of partners that she has, the more likely this is to happen to her.
Yes, sexual promiscuity in America is epidemic. There are many and complex reasons for this. Indeed, there are no simple answers to why we have such a major problem. But Joanne Gasper, Deputy Assistant Secretary at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, suggests some very likely possibilities.
Some of the things which are happening in our society, we have, of course, a much more mobile society than we've had in the past. We unfortunately have much higher divorce rates than we've had in the past. We see a lot of changes in how life goes on. We have increased participation of women in the labor force. And I think we ought not to underestimate the impact of television and the media on our young people, with the increased portrayal of violence, the increased portrayal of premarital sexual activity.
I think one of the other reasons why young people become involved early in their lives is a sign of our times that sex and intercourse is a sign of love, and these young people are looking for love. It's the fairy tale type of love where they think, I'm going to fall in love and live happily ever after.
Some kids we know are looking for someone to love them, and they will purposely get pregnant because then they have a baby who cares about them. Their own childhood has been so sad and so lacking in love and opportunity that, you know, they think that baby will bring that to their lives. And of course it's a very serious mistake, but when you're 14, 15, 13, you know, do you know that that's not the way it's going to be?
It's not the kind of love that's enduring. These young girls find out that they've been an object of somebody's attention. They've been used. They, you know, literally they've been exploited. And when they suddenly realize what's happening, then their self-esteem and their self-worth goes down even more and more.
At the Kennedy Foundation, Eunice Kennedy Shriver and her staff are increasingly concerned and involved in helping kids avoid early sexual involvement. She is also very concerned about the influences all around us that encourage this kind of behavior.
I think they get a lot of signals that are very confusing to them, and I think they watch the movies, they watch these very sexy ads on television, on promotion of songs. They read about divorce, and they get quite disillusioned about marriage. They see people who are supposedly their idols in terms of television having babies out of wedlock and accepting that as a way of life, and they think, well, why not? And so it's a very difficult time for them. What does marriage mean? Why get married? The pill is available. You don't have to have children, so why not live with somebody an extended period of time? And all of that ends up, as they say, is very confusing to adults, so why shouldn't it be to young people?
In addition to the confusing and negative examples of morality we see all around us, what's not being taught is also a great concern to many. Dr. Louis Lieberman is an author and professor of sociology in New York City and is very concerned about kids.
They really have no basis for making the correct or wise choices in life, the kind of choices that we would see perhaps as moral choices. What I'm trying to get at is that they don't seem to have a code of morality that they've ever been taught. And it doesn't matter whether they're Protestant, Catholic, Jew, or atheist.
And why haven't they been taught? According to Rabbi Leonard Kravitz, the problem exists because of changes in how people live.
Think of what occurred in the past when everybody lived in the same set of standards. Think of a neighborhood. Many of us grew up in a particular kind of a neighborhood. Everybody knew our name. When I was a kid growing up in Cleveland in a particular neighborhood, everyone could know my name and would tell my mother. So there was a control on my behavior, whether I liked it or not. We now live in a different fashion. People move around a lot. People change positions, change jobs, change localities, and therefore no one has the support of a family or of a community or of a pattern of life that they're certain of.
And now more than ever before, youth are looking for that guidance, for that set of standards. And when they don't get it, the results can be disastrous.
When Dana became pregnant, she was only 16, but she claims her problems began long before that. When she began attending parties and spending a lot of time with boys when she was in the 8th grade. Now she wishes she'd had more guidance from her parents.
I wouldn't want to put the blame on my mother, but I think if she would have been a lot stricter and wouldn't have let me go out as much, would have monitored me more closer to the kind of people I was hanging around, it could have been avoided.
It was 12-year-olds up to 17-year-olds. They're searching for an answer to the question, who am I and what am I? They want to be able to make decisions, independent, responsible decision, in conjunction, hopefully, with their family, in which they will get a much greater understanding of caring, sexuality, of commitment, of long-range planning, of all those kinds of things, and not look for a quick fix to some problem, an overnight stand for some problem. Those are not satisfactory answers to all the young people I've talked about, and they are not any more satisfactory to their families.
In Pittsburgh, Reed Carpenter spends all of his time trying to put morality back into our lives. Carpenter is another adult who really cares, and one who is asking questions and getting answers.
Some months ago, I sent my own kids out on a little fact-finding tour because I had to speak at a junior high, asking their friends the question, if you could tell an adult anything you wanted them to know, what would you tell them? And one of the things was the fact that we feel very unprotected. We feel very unprotected. We feel like no one's protecting us and that everyone's exploiting us. Case in point, is AIDS an adult problem or is it a kid problem? It's an adult problem. Kids didn't cause AIDS. They are now vulnerable to AIDS because the adult population has made a series of bad decisions that now kids are the victims. The kids feel that deeply. So that the family, the disintegration of the family as the caretaker of values and the perpetuators of life, I think would have to get the gold star in terms of the culprit that has caused the greatest demise here.
To ensure the survival of our whole society, we must teach correct principles, by word and by example. But who is to teach them? And what is to be taught? Well, to these questions, there are many good answers.
It should be taught at home. It should be taught in the churches and synagogues. It should be taught in the various institutions of our lives, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, military, business world. That's where it should be taught, because it should be part and parcel of our very existence as a civilized human society.
In one program in Atlanta, kids are teaching kids about sexual morality. Under adult supervision, a select group of high school students visit 8th grade classes regularly and instruct their younger pupils in how to say no to premarital sex.
Tell the person how the continued pressure is making you feel. That's to take the offensive. Y'all remember that? Yes. Okay, who knows the third technique? Okay.
Refuse to say anything.
Refuse to discuss the matter any further, or just simply walk away. Now you have to keep these in mind, okay? The first technique is to say no and keep repeating it.
Well, most of the kids that we talk to, they're pretty serious. The first time you go to them, they're kind of playful, but after a while, they know we mean business because we keep coming back and coming back. So after a while, they'll get into the swing of things, and they'll start paying close attention, and then they'll start asking you questions.
Derek Smith and Macklin Brown are teen counselors in a statewide program called Postponing Sexual Involvement. They're very serious about their work and about their responsibility to their young students.
First of all, premarital sex is a sin, and that's my belief. And I think that, and it's disgraceful to see young kids around pregnant as they are. I think we should try to do anything that we can do to discourage them from becoming sexually involved. And some of the problems that they are faced with is they don't know how to say no. So that's what we do. We tell them how they can say no.
I found that a lot of the 8th graders, most of the time they have brothers and sisters who go to high school, and their brothers and sisters tell them the situation about having sex. So a lot of times they kind of get curious about the situation and they start experimenting with sex.
By the time they reach 8th grade, they've already had 8 years to talk to each other, and they've already decided whether or not they really want to try this.
Because like we tell the 8th graders, we tell them that everybody's not having sex. That's only something that you hear a lot. And if having sex makes you popular, who wants to be popular because they have a baby or because they have a venereal disease? So that's not really popularity.
There are many places where morality can and ought to be taught, but certainly the family should be the first line of defense.
When we look at what makes a difference or what helps children to not engage in premature sexual activity, the things that we find out that work are children who have good family communications, who have the benefit of growing up in an intact family, and who have religiosity. And by religiosity, we're not talking about Protestant, Catholic, or Jew, or any specific denomination, but recognize that people who go to church and recognize religious values. And those are areas where government cannot function very well, but families very much can. And I think, yes, that having good families and supportive churches and supportive schools that support good family life and good family values will make a big difference.
Well, I think the churches, in a sense, can become the neighborhoods that we grew up in, sort of a transported neighborhood. And by which I mean people who think alike, and as it were, in the same place, can reinforce one another. That's what they can do. They can provide reinforcement in all of the values that they're on, and in fact do that. That can perhaps guide kids by guiding parents and giving them a sense that there's somebody else talking, somebody else caring about them. And particularly if religion gives these kids now sense that somebody really cares about them, and that we understand the problems they live with, and we have a feeling with what they're being challenged with. I think they can give young people and their parents a sense of worth.
Well, you have to teach, I think, the parents how to teach morality. I think this is one of the first places that the institutional churches and synagogues can begin. They can bring more parents in and use teenagers, use the younger people who understand the issues of morality, particularly sexual morality, use them to teach morality to the other teenagers. And if necessary, use the teenagers to teach it to their parents. But certainly it's got to begin somewhere. We're just drifting.
Well, it comes down to basics. It has to be mother, fathers, has to be ministers or pastors or rabbis. It has to be, more than that, it's got to be peer group. Some way you've got to get to the whole peer group pressure.
And now to the final question of what and how do we teach? Here again, those with much experience have many good ideas.
The stages of moral development of a child begin very, very early. It really begins about 2 and 3. We don't know how really to teach morality systematically to children. But if St. Thomas was right, that, you know, by the time a child is 6 years old, his sense of right or wrong is pretty well formed, and I agree with that to a large extent, then you've got to teach morality at a much earlier age. The problem has been a lot of parents think they're teaching morality, but what they're teaching is prohibition. They say, you can't do this, this is what you have to do, you can't do that, that's a no-no, and so forth. That's not morality. That's punitive approach, and all it teaches the child is, once you get in a situation where they no longer can tell what you're doing, then you can do whatever you feel like doing.
Ideally, one should learn how to be good from one's parents. Ideally, one, as a parent, should teach kids how to be good. And I don't mean be good in terms of don't do this or don't do that, but good in terms of caring, good in terms of giving love. Hopefully, if we do that, we will set up a chain of caring from parents to children, who in turn will be parents, and so on, by generation after generation. If we don't, we do that probably the same way. That is, generation after generation become non-caring, non-involved, rather vicious, and that happens too. That is where I think values are more caught than taught. It isn't merely saying to a kid, don't or do. It's how, in fact, do you live your life as a parent? And that's a harder thing.
I'm talking about finding a way for short periods of time to let go of the prerogatives of being adults and parents and almost becoming a kid. Going out and hanging out in the world that our kids are in. Go to a rock concert. Sit there. Watch what's going on. Listen to their music. Go with them to their music. Find out what in the world these kids are feeling and thinking. What's being told to them in the marketplace of ideas. What's being told to them in the context of their friends. What are they watching? What are they seeing? What are they thinking? What are they feeling?
So sometimes my kids ask me about sex issues, and they don't. Their questions are usually a little off the wall, and sometimes we go through a couple of minutes of the giggles because their question is so funny, the way they've expressed it. And I just decided a couple of years ago that if I got the giggles because of their question on sex, that was all right. But after we get through that, we can talk about it. And that way I feel more comfortable about it. And sometimes we go to the dictionary or the encyclopedia, you know, if they ask a technical question and I don't know the answer. But, you know, my kids realize, I think, finally, that I'm not perfect. And I realize that I'm never going to be a perfect parent, nor are they going to be perfect kids. And I think we kind of limp along, doing the best we can. And it's working better since we all realized that we all have our failings, but that we care about each other.
One of the most interesting things you can do to a group of young people as you talk about unwanted pregnancies is say, how would you like to have a 13-year-old father? You know, think about your own father. But how would you like to have a 13-year-old father instead of the one you've got? Or a 13-year-old mother? And, you know, no way do they want to, they put it in terms of being the child now.
I would tell teenagers, just as I've told my own children, the best thing to do is to learn how to say no. Think through saying no before the temptation to do something else occurs, and then be prepared to stand up to those standards. Don't fall by the guiles that everyone else is doing it or no one else will know. Everyone else isn't doing it. I mentioned the 10,000 that are infected, 10 million that are infected, but there's another 230 million that aren't involving themselves in those kind of lifestyles and really don't need to worry about sexually transmittable diseases.
I don't think we pussyfoot around about morality. I think we just lay it on the line with these kids. Say, hey, you know, if you want to be happy, why, this is the way it is.
There isn't going to be a clear-cut medical solution. If people, if young people will learn to say no, they have nothing to gain by premarital sex, and they have so much to lose. And if adults can establish a stable, mutually faithful, monogamous relationship, then these diseases aren't going to be transmitted. And I don't see a solution medically. The only solution I see in the long run are behavioral changes on the part of the population.
One of the great things I learned was when I was in the Army as a chaplain. I was a stockade chaplain. I found that people in the stockade had a terrible view of themselves and had lived up to that view. If you think you're nobody and nothing, you'll live like nobody and nothing. I think if religion can give kids a sense they're somebody, they're worthwhile, they'll live that way.
Young people don't jump in bed with each other if they really feel good about themselves, if they have some self-esteem. They really feel worthwhile. And I think if there's going to be a move to help young people, that's what you desperately need to teach them, to feel good about themselves.
I think we're, as an adult society, we're very, very good at studying the markets. You know, we know how to sell anything to anybody. I mean, look at the ads on television, you know, that sell Pepsi and Coke. I mean, they got Michael Jackson doing things. I mean, they got Reebok. Somebody's done some incredible research to find out how to communicate a message, right? Unbelievable. They've spent millions of dollars to know how to take a product and sell it to kids. We haven't spent a dime. We have not spent one dime in taking the message that we want to get to kids. I'm just convinced, without trying to give you big, fat answers, that if we wanted to do it, we could do it. We could find a way to get our message to kids.
And a final word to youth, parents, teachers, religious leaders, and political leaders. To all those who care about the future, we must invest our time and means in the fight against sexual immorality. It won't be easy, but it must be done. And the battle can be won.
The program you have just seen is part of a series of programs dealing with significant issues of public concern. Times and Seasons is a production of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.